Good evening, everyone. I'm Margaret Stewart, a member of 100% Real, the Renewable Energy Alliance of Louisville. And with others, I welcome you to our 7th quarterly Real Good News event, one of a series to inform you about Louisville's efforts to transition to renewable energy. I want you to note that this program is being recorded, and also, in case you missed it, a recording of our previous forum in which we interviewed Louisville mayoral candidates regarding renewable energy is available and can be found at the link you will see on your screen. Paul, if you'll put that up. Also, we want to ask that you please keep yourself muted throughout this program unless you're asking a question during the Q&A. We're going to open this evening, as we have in the past other events, with a song performed by local musician, activist, and all-around good guy, John Gage. Let's listen now. John?
I live on a big blue ball. I never do dream I might fall, but even the day that I do, I'll jump off and smile back at you. I don't even know where we are. They tell us we're circling the star. Celestial creatures of light. We're children of love shining bright. We walk where evening shadows wash the shore, with radiant sunsets pure as gold. Divine love shines in starlight evermore. Creation's power and beauty unfolds. We're learning as children to let go. Surrender to the sacred river's flow. Looking within for what we know. Spirit will guide us as we grow. We're riding a big blue ball. We never do dream we might fall. Universal love surrounds us all, sustaining all creatures, great and small. We live on a big blue ball. Universal love surrounds us all.
Thank you so much, John, for that Beautiful song. And thanks also to Rhodey Streeter, who created the montage that accompanies it. Once again, I want to say welcome to this evening's Real Good News discussion. Our topic for tonight is municipalization, presented this evening by the Renewable Energy Alliance of Louisville. You can visit our website, which Paula posts on the screen, to learn more about our organization. We're grateful also to our co-sponsors, the Kentucky Interfaith Power and Light, KIPPL, under the very capable leadership of Elisa Owen, and also to Paul Westland and the Christian Action Group of St. Paul United Methodist Church. Thank you all for sponsoring us. A little history before we get into the program tonight. Aware that our world today faces enormous challenges that require bold action, local climate activists, members of the Renewable Energy Alliance of Louisville, REAL, succeeded 2 years ago in getting the Metro Council to pass a resolution that will, when fully implemented, revolutionize the way our city powers itself. The Renewable Energy Resolution sets a timeline to meet 3 particular goals. The first goal for 2030, that's 8 years from now, is to achieve clean, renewable electricity for all Metro government operations. The second goal, 5 years later, that's 13 years from now in 2035, is for clean, renewable energy for all Metro government operations. That clean renewable energy would include not only electricity, but it would include transportation and also heating and cooling for Metro government operations. The final goal for 2040, that's 18 years from now, is clean renewable energy for the entire Metro community. Ambitious but important goals. How now, the question is, are we going to actually achieve these goals? Lots of things are happening and a lot more need to be happening, but I'll give you one example. The city has now hired an energy manager who has identified thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars in energy conservation and efficiency savings for the city. I want to focus for a minute though or a few minutes on how you, our listeners, can help. What can you do? One possibility, for some of you at least, is to tap into the city's relatively new Solar Over Louisville program, which offers individuals an opportunity to have a carefully vetted solar company install panels on their rooftop at a discounted price. But you need to know, you have to act immediately. Tomorrow, June 30th, is the deadline to register for this particular program. Registration is not a commitment, so don't worry about that. But if you have any interest at all in installing solar on your property, I encourage you tonight or tomorrow, go to this link, 100% Lou, and percent is spelled out, 100percentlou.com/2040. Register for Solar Over Louisville to learn more about how you can take advantage of this special opportunity. I hope you will. Many of you also can help in another way. One of the ongoing activities of REAL is to encourage individuals to give free talks about renewable energy each time the Metro Council meets. Recently, Tim Dars spoke urging the council to budget monies for specific renewable energy endeavors. And at the last meeting, a different one, Sam Avery urged council members to consider the possibility of municipalization of our utility, the topic for this evening. We encourage others of you to volunteer to speak on any aspect of the issue that you wish to address. Each person's perspective is unique, and the more individuals that the council hears from, the better. You can obtain more information if you're considering this, more information about speaking from Sam Avery. His email is here, samuelavery@gmail.com. Another thing that you can do, submit comments to the PSC, that's the Public Service Commission, by July 12th regarding LG&E's Integrated Resource Plan. Urge changes in that plan, changes to quickly phase out fossil fuel energy and facilitate more renewable energy. I'll share a little more background about that in just a minute, but please visit k4ed.org. You should see that on your screen to learn more and find out how you can submit your comments to the PSC, the Public Service Commission. A quick preview for how this evening's program will progress. Our topic is municipalization. We'll try to find out what is it and how might it help us here in Louisville. We have 3 speakers this evening: Janice Beecher from the Institute of Public Utilities, Michigan State University, Allison Smith from the University of Louisville, not from the University of Louisville, from the Louisville Office of Advanced Planning and Sustainability. And finally, Sam Avery, member of the Renewable Energy Alliance of Louisville. We'll have questions and answers to follow the speakers. We'll do that as much as time permits, and we'll conclude at 8:30 or before, if we wind up before, with music by John Gage. Little background before our discussion. Why did we decide to choose municipalization for our topic tonight? Well, here's one reason. We have in Louisville a fixed utility, LG&E. Is LG&E our fixed forever one and only utility? Some of us, those who delve into such matters, found that LG&E's recent IRP to the PSC set off alarm bells. I'll repeat that. LGE's recent IRP to the PSC set off alarm bells. What does that mean? Okay, I'll try to explain. Every 3 years, LG&E, our Louisville Gas and Electric Utility, submits a plan to the Public Service Commission, the PSC, Kentucky's Public Service Commission, which is the body charged with regulating our utilities. This IRP, or Integrated Resource Plan, is the outline for the mixture of energy sources that LG&E plans to use for the next 15 years. In other words, how much coal, how much gas, hydro, and solar LG&E plans to use to meet energy demands. Those who dug into the nitty-gritty of LG&E's plan found that the utility on which we now exclusively depend expects to burn coal until 2066 and burn gas even beyond that. This, in spite of the fact that solar energy is now generally cheaper than coal. LG&E's plan, this IRP, is not only incompatible with the goals of Louisville's renewable energy resolution, it is totally incompatible with the all too real urgency of the climate crisis we face. If we want to actually attain the goals of our city's resolution, if we want to do what we can and must do for the well-being of our citizens and for the sake of a livable planet, we will have to find alternatives. The decisions we make today are critical to our future well-being. So, again, I urge you, submit your comments regarding these matters to the Public Service Commission, the PSC. Inundate the PSC with your comments. And now, consider this question with us this evening. Could municipalization or partial municipalization offer a path toward a clean energy future for our city. Let's learn more. Sam, I turn it over to you now. Sam Avery.
Thank you, Margaret. Appreciate that. And then you said municipalization very well this time.
Struggle with that word.
It's taken us all like several weeks to learn how to say it, and now we're ready to learn what it's all about. And what we're talking about tonight is what's called partial municipalization. The idea here is of the city owning the means of transmitting, distributing, and I hope generating renewable energy for city-owned buildings. That is for the energy consumption that the city is directly responsible for. That's our first target with the renewable energy resolution. And the idea here is to partially municipalize just enough energy for the city's own buildings. That turns out to be about 1% of the total generation of LG&E. So we're not talking about revolutionizing anything at this point. But if we figure out how to do that first 1%, we're going to have a good idea how to do it for the other 99%, or how to not do it for the other 99%. So we did this on purpose. We set it up so that the first goal would be achievable in a fairly rapid pace and would educate us as to how to do it for the entire community. So we're not sure, of course, that municipalization will work for Louisville, but we're going to find out. And I should stress here also that, as Margaret indicated, we would very much like to do this in partnership with LG&E. They know even more about electricity than we do. And we would like to have that knowledge. We would like them to work with us. But if they're not going to do it, and it looks like they're not interested in doing it, they've totally ignored the resolution. They've totally ignored what's happening in the rest of the world. They're dragging their feet. They come up with a business plan that has nothing to do with the realities in the world that we're all facing. So it looks like they're not interested. And if they're not interested, we're going to find some other way of getting electricity and other sources of energy to this city that come from renewable sources. Now, before we get into the details here, I'm going to give you a little perspective of where we stand. Maybe this will give you some idea as to why we're here. For the last 10,000 years, since the end of the ice ages, right up until 1880, the Earth's atmosphere held a pretty steady carbon dioxide concentration of about 280 parts per million. Right now, the air that you and I are breathing has 420 parts per million carbon dioxide. That's a 50% increase. So that every cubic inch of the entire planetary system now has 50% more carbon in it than it did before we started burning fossil fuel. And that's why the atmosphere is changing the way it behaves. It can't help it. That's a tremendous difference in the constitution and the constituency of the atmosphere. The last time that the atmosphere was this full of carbon was 3.5 million years ago. And at that time, sea levels were 78 feet higher and temperatures were 7 degrees hotter. Now we're worried about 1.5 degrees or 2 degrees. Furthermore, even today, this year, we are still pumping about 40 billion tons of carbon dioxide into the Earth's atmosphere every year. Next year, we will probably pump about 41 billion tons of carbon dioxide. So the carbon dioxide level is not only going up, the rate of increase is increasing. So what we're doing here tonight, and I'm glad to have all of you people here with us tonight, what we're doing is we're thinking globally and acting locally. When we act locally, when we talk about subjects which might not be of tremendous popular interest, what we're doing is we're thinking globally and then focusing down to what we can actually do here. And that has to do, what we can do ourselves, has to do with a power line that cuts through the southern part of Jefferson County, a power line that is not owned by LG&E. It's owned by a company called MISO, the Mid-Continent Independent System Operator. We were calling it MISO for the longest time, but we found out that was soup and not electricity. So we're trying to remember, as we learn to say municipalization, we're also learning how to say MISO. Now, MISO is a large utility. It's a distribution company. It's nonprofit, but it has 42 million customers. So it's a pretty big operation. And they have a power line running right close to Louisville. Now, this is what we're considering tapping into for renewable energy for the 2030 goal. Now, my own research into MISO indicates that their renewable energy mix is currently about 15%. So I'm not sure how we're going to get 100% renewable energy out of a 15% power line, but I'm sure maybe we'll find out more about that tonight. I'm not sure if there are ways we can buy 100% from them. But in addition to this, in addition to tapping in to an already existing source of renewable energy, I would like very much for the city to consider finding a 400 or 500 acre site for a utility scale solar installation, which could produce about the amount of energy that the city is consuming. This, I think, would be a little bit more of an honest contribution to the larger global picture. Rather than just buying ready-made renewable energy, there's no reason why we can't produce it ourselves. This is something that's happening all over the country. It's happening all over Kentucky. The size that we need is already, there are bigger systems than this currently being built. There are dozens of solar contractors out looking to do this kind of installation. There's nothing technical that would stop this happening. We already know the technology. We know also that solar energy in the long run is a lot cheaper than other forms of energy. So there's really nothing holding us back from doing something like this other than politics and somehow dealing with the local monopoly that we have. And I would, as I said before, I would love to work with them. They have the know-how. And also I would say, you know, their problem is that they have a lot of existing infrastructure that's the wrong kind of infrastructure. It's fossil fuel infrastructure. And that tends to last for a long time. And what that does, what fossil fuel infrastructure does, is it creates dependence. Because we have this feeling we have to use up the existing infrastructure before we can buy new infrastructure. And that makes sense. From a business point of view, that makes sense. Use what you have before you buy anything new. But from the standpoint of what is actually happening in the world, this is an emergency. You know, I'm an alarmist. The alarm is going off, and not a lot of people are seeing it or hearing it. But if people were to be able to concentrate on what's really happening out there, we would be willing to take some sacrifices in order to revolutionize how we use energy. And I would also say that if we can't find a way to do it with renewable energy, we shouldn't do it at all. If we can't find a way to produce renewable electricity and renewable heating and cooling and renewable transportation, we have no business using any more fossil fuel. We should go back to the horse and buggy days, cut down the power poles, and just try to find another way to live. I don't believe we're going to have to do that. But what I'm saying is we need that kind of commitment to making the changes we have to make. So I would say in conclusion that the 2030 goal of renewable energy for city operations, the goal that we're working on right now. It could be that partial municipalization will do this for us. We don't know that yet, but we're going to find out. And if it does work, we are going to have a lot better idea of how to do the 2040 goal of community-wide renewable electricity and renewable energy. So this is a time to experiment, to find out what's available, to find out what we can do, and then we have to do it. So the our other speakers tonight are Allison Smith and Janice Beecher. We'll give each of them a chance to tell us a little more about how we can do this here in Louisville. And hopefully we'll have some time after that for question and answer. So if you have some questions, write them into the chat, and we'll see if we can get to as many of them as possible. Okay, so first of all, Allison Smith holds a PhD in biology from the University of Louisville. She is currently the Assistant Director of the Office of Advanced Planning and Sustainability for Louisville Metro Council. In this role, she oversees the city's sustainability efforts, including environmental justice policy and inclusive community engagement. Allison, take it away, please.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for having me and for that introduction, Sam. I was excited to be able to come and talk to this group about the idea of municipalization, but I want to go back just a step and talk for a minute about how we got here. Now, this group knows these resolutions as well as I do. You probably hear them in your sleep. But what we're really focused on right now is that 100% clean electricity for government operations by 2030. So that's what we're going to talk about tonight. But I don't want to leave you with the impression that we're focusing on that goal to the exclusion of everything else. So just quickly, I want to mention some of the other work that we're doing towards the other two goals. First, we have a couple of partnerships with the Department of Energy. You may have heard they are getting a ton of funding to help make this just energy transition. And they are looking to localities, to states, to businesses, to institutions to provide the technical assistance to do that. So we have joined the Better Climate, Better Buildings Challenge issued by the Department of Energy. And they asked us to commit to cutting our municipal emissions 50% by 2032. So we have made that commitment. We also have made the commitment to reduce energy use in municipal buildings 30% by 2032. These are tough goals to reach, but they are in line with what we need to do to keep global warming under 1.5 degrees Celsius. So we'll get support from Department of Energy, hopefully help identifying funding sources, how to navigate policy. We're very glad to have those partnerships to help us achieve those goals. We also are partnering on the Communities LEAP program from Department of Energy. That is going to help us reach that 2040 goal, and it's going to help us specifically to tailor programs that will specifically help people who are most impacted by energy burden, by climate change, ones who have the highest energy bills, have had the poorest air quality because of fossil fuels, to make sure that everyone gets to come along on this just transition. So we're excited to have their help on both of those. You mentioned the Solar Over Louisville program that we're running. I'm going to give you all a sneak peek of a press release that's going to go out tomorrow. We have had over 1,000 people sign up interest forms. And because of the demand, we're going to extend that sign up deadline to August 14th. We have had so many people that we could not get to them all. And we want to continue this on. So we worked with Solar Energy Solutions, our vetted partner, and we're going to extend the sign up deadline to August 14th. And again, this is just an interest form. If you give us that information with your address, a little basic information, that'll come to our office and we'll look to see if your house really is a good candidate for solar. And we'll talk to you about that before we pass that on to the installer. So if you are interested in that, and that does apply to residential as well as commercial. So if you have a small business or an entity like that, please reach out to us. So how do we get to that clean electricity goal? As Sam said, we are in a regulated monopoly state. So we don't have a whole lot of options on how to get to clean electricity at this point. I think things are going to change in the next few years. Hopefully we will see movement at the federal level to help us achieve those goals. But for right now, in the context in which we're working, we have to think about not just electricity supply. I know everyone here is committed to solar, and that is one of the most practical and easiest solutions right now. But we have to also think about electricity demand. So as Margaret mentioned, we hired an energy manager just over a year ago. He saved us over $800,000 just by correcting billing errors, getting us on the right rate structures, adjusting building setbacks, making sure buildings weren't running 24/7. He hasn't spent a penny, but has saved us that. Zach and I were then able to lobby Metro Council to establish an energy innovation fund. So what that means is that 80% of those savings will go into a fund that Zach then has at his disposal to do capital improvements like new HVAC, LED lighting, the things that do cost money that we will have to do to continue to reduce our energy use. So we're very excited to have not just seen savings, but be able to reinvest those in municipal buildings going forward. How we got to municipalization was with the help of the National Renewable Energy Lab out of Golden, Colorado. And I believe Owen, who was our project manager, spoke here once before. He's no longer our manager. I need to share with you our new manager's information, Thomas Bowen. It's actually on 100%lu.com if you have any questions for NREL. So when we did phase one, our simple question was, what are the avenues for us to get to 100% clean electricity, right? We don't see any. How do we do that? So this is the result, kind of the deliverable out of phase one, that show a range of options for us to do, from very involved with the utility, LG&E on the left, and then without the involvement of LG&E on the right. So the first was LG&E Green Tariff and Solar Shares Program. So the Green Tariff is a program, it's state legislation that a large customer like Louisville Metro, like Dow or Toyota or U of L or UK, can request that the utility build solar on their behalf to meet their needs. And you get the credit for that solar. And that means that you negotiate a price with LG&E for what you will pay for that energy for the next 20 years. They contract out with a solar developer to have that built. So that is one option that is on the table. Now that requires a lot of negotiation, and it will vary on how practical that will be economically. And then of course the solar share program could be used to offset, maybe that last few percent. So these are ways that we could make a commitment, work with LG&E, and potentially meet that goal. So as we work with NREL through phase two, they are going to help us evaluate what would a green tariff have to look like for it to be financially viable for us? What would be the contingencies? What would be the cost that we would have to pay? Because as you know, we are stewards of the tax dollar, and we have to be very conscious of that. So we're going to work with NREL to negotiate with LG&E on that option. The second option they identified is called a virtual power purchase agreement. This would be this is a financial transaction where we would invest in renewable energy in another state, solar in Oklahoma or wind in Texas, right? We would be an investor in that. This is purely a financial arrangement, does not change the energy that we use in any way. But it is the way that some businesses reach that net zero. They offset their use by making investments in renewable. Because this is purely a financial transaction and it doesn't achieve the other goals that we want, like cleaner air and to address climate change here locally, we've taken that one off the table right now. It's also financially risky. You may make money, you also may lose some money. So we'll come back to that one if we need to, but for now that's off the table. NREL also identified some policy advocacy activities. Now that is outside the scope of what NREL does, because they are a federal agency. They do not do advocacy around any specific policies. They have helped us identify opportunities where we can advocate for the policy that we need. So as Margaret mentioned, LG&E's integrated resource plan was released October of last year. It does show that by 2036, they will still be at 80% fossil fuel use with about 20% of renewable sources. Louisville Metro took the step of legally intervening in that IRP, just like we did in the previous rate case. So our county attorney submitted a motion that we wanted to be an intervener in this. And, I'm so sorry, intervener in My cat has brought a snake in the house and is freaking the dog out. So I apologize. He can deal with that right there. So as I said, we have intervened legally in this integrated resource plan so that we could state, as Margaret said, this does not allow us to meet our goals. And frankly, it doesn't allow LG&E to meet their goals either. So we have submitted comments, which if you follow the link that was posted in the chat, you can see the comments that we submitted. They are maybe not what LG&E wanted. They're more interested in modeling and costs, but we laid out a pretty good argument for why we need to address climate change, how there are health impacts, and this just does not help us meet our goals. So those are a lot of the activities that are going on in addition to what we'll talk about tonight. So the right side of that arrow, municipalization, for Louisville Metro government only, or they went ahead and put it on there because it is a viable solution for the entire community. Oops. So this was split off from phase 2 with NREL for us to do independently. We weren't ready to commit to a full municipalization study, which can cost hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars to actually do a detailed point-by-point analysis. So we said, well, let's pull this out of NREL so we can do the work with them that we need to. And we're going to issue an RFP for a preliminary, or what we call a pre-feasibility analysis for partial municipalization of electric distribution system to support achievement of 100% renewable electricity goal for municipal operations by 2030. It could totally be a dissertation title. And what we have done is posted this on what's called Bonfire. The link is on here and you're welcome to share the presentation afterwards. That is where Louisville Metro government posts all of their bid opportunities. So we provided a bunch of firms that we knew could do this work, so they were alerted. We issued this once before a couple months ago, and I think our timing was bad. We didn't leave it out long enough, and we only got 2 responses that we just weren't happy with. So we have reissued it. It is currently open. We're leaving it open for about 6 weeks this time, give people plenty of time to respond. And basically what we're asking the consultant to do is tell us that they understand what it is we're asking. They understand how to approach this from a technical perspective. We want to know about their firm. That's something that we always ask. What is your experience? What staff would be working on this? And then of course, what is your pricing? And we've asked them for 4 specific analyses. One is how much it would cost to distribute electricity municipally, how much it would cost to transmit it, how much to generate it, and then what's a cost of service comparison between, for example, MISO or LG&E or PJM or any of the other utilities operating in Kentucky. So this is the basics of what we asked for. And we broke it down in 2 ways because we do have the issue that Metro government is spread out all across the county, from the far southwestern corner to the far northeastern corner, our municipal facilities. So how do we approach actually being able to transmit power to all of these different entities? So we asked in our RFP for 2 different scenarios. We want them to look at, if we did every municipal building that Louisville Metro owns, what would it look like to extend service from our municipal power source, whether that is building solar or purchasing renewable energy from another entity? I'm guessing it would be a mix. There's no one hard and fast solution. What would that look like? What would the cost be? And this is very early estimates. And then we also asked for a second optimal scenario. If we just took a portfolio of metro buildings that are maybe more closely geographically, what would it look like to do a utility that served just those buildings? So we asked for an analysis of both of these scenarios. Now, as far as generation, we looked at a few things: procuring clean energy through market mechanisms and contracting. So as a municipal utility, as Sam said, we could hire a developer to build solar for us and then use that power as long as we transmit it into Louisville and are able to distribute it. We're only a few miles from that very large power line, so it's not a huge leap to think that we might be able to connect. So what would that combination look like? Now this would require in all likelihood, building a new distribution network. This is something that's been looked at in other cities like Ann Arbor, Michigan. So Ann Arbor initially looked at full municipalization. We're going to buy out the utility. We're going to buy the power lines, all of that. And that was cost prohibitive. And as we all know, most of that infrastructure is pretty old. So what we're looking at, as Ann Arbor did, is what's called an overbuild. So if we were to municipalize for government buildings, we would simply build out lines connecting our buildings on top of LG&E's infrastructure, right? So that would mean that we would be able to generate power, transmit it to buildings with LG&E still operating underneath, but all of our buildings would be served by that municipal utility. So we looked at two different scenarios for that. And we are keeping in mind that if this were feasible for metro government operations, it might also be feasible for the entire community. And an overbuild is really a much cleaner way to develop a municipal utility. We've had lots of conversations about this. As Sam said, municipalization is not a huge stretch. The Louisville Water Company is owned by Louisville Metro government primarily. It is municipally owned. It is not uncommon to have your power, your water, your sewer to be owned and operated municipally. But to achieve that is usually a fight. So for example, we've spoken to some government employees in Denver where they did attempt to municipalize, and they spent about 10 years in court negotiating in legal battles with their utility to try to municipalize. And while they did not successfully municipalize, at the end of those 10 years, they did successfully negotiate for the renewable energy that they wanted with their utility. So I think that the route is worth exploring regardless of where it gets us. It is an option on the table, and we think it's important that we consider every option. Let's see, I mentioned generation. Let's see. I will say that I was surprised when the RFP first went out. I did 3 or 4 interviews. This got a lot of attention locally and nationally. People were very excited about it. And we actually got a lot of calls from national press who wanted to hear more about this option of municipalization. Now, I will be the first to admit that this is my first foray into this. And so for me, this preliminary feasibility study will potentially start us down that path to learning more about that. I'm excited that Dr. Beecher is here to share with us a more general overview of what municipalization looks like and what's involved. I am going to make one last plug. Our entire sustainability team did a half-hour radio show on Sprouts Network about our sustainability work here in Louisville Metro, and we'd be really happy if you guys would check it out. Again, I've included the link in the PowerPoint. I will stop there. Thank you for the link, Sameda, for our press releases and for the feasibility RFP, which you can go online. Now you have to create an account on Bonfire, but it's free. You just create a name and password. You can go in and see the actual RFP. I'll stop there and turn it back over to Sam.
Thank you, Allison. I appreciate that. It's always good to know how it looks from your point of view, because those of us who are advocating for these changes, we try to figure out how it might look from the point of view of people who actually have to do it. It's very different. So we need to stay in touch, and you need to keep us real, and we need to keep you motivated. Okay, our next speaker then is Dr. Janice Beecher. Dr. Beecher has served as director of the Institute of Public Utilities at Michigan State University since 2002. Her areas of interest include regulatory institutions, principles and practices, infrastructure funding, and financing. She is editor of the journal Utilities Policy and a faculty member at Michigan State University's Department of Political Science. Dr. Beecher, please take it away.
All right. Thank you so much, Sam, and thanks to all of you for your wonderful hospitality and inviting me to this important dialogue. I'm always impressed by community engagement of this at this level. It's really impressive, and I'm just delighted to be here and to try to be a resource if I can. I will give a fairly general overview. I've been, like all of us, doing a lot of Zoom. I think this is the first time a cat brought a snake in. I mean, there's been numerous cat incidents on the last, all of them memorable, but this is the top one for sure. So it was worth coming just for that. So I'm going to just give some general remarks. I'm not going to give any particular analysis of Louisville or your case, but the invitation resonated with me because I've heard from these different communities around the country on this issue, and it is actually a global issue as well, which I'll touch on. So I kind of specialize in the utility model, utility structures, as it particularly relates to their regulation by the public service commissions. So that's a key audience for us. In fact, our institute trains regulators in all of these things and how to think like a regulator and how to apply regulation to monopoly industries. And so, that's, again, it's a very interesting challenge. Regulation is a very interdisciplinary area. It's always been challenging in that respect. It involves engineering and economics, the law, accounting, finance, all these disciplines, come to bear on utility regulation. And then, of course, the last couple of years, we have been very focused on the transformation of the energy system toward our clean energy, as well as our environmental justice goals. So that has made it both, additionally challenging, but also a really exciting time. And I've heard a lot of the things that you've been mentioning already really, again, sort of ring in my ears as far as things like, how the economics are shifting in favor of clean energy. And so that beautiful alignment of economic and environmental and affordability goals that's sort of the holy grail, right? We all want clean, affordable, reliable energy because it makes people's lives better, it makes for better communities. And so that's really what we're talking about in the end. So I will be glad to just give you a brief introduction to some of these issues, and then I'd be glad to try to answer some of your questions if I can. And if I can't, I'm fortunate to know a lot of smart people, so I can always help you get in touch with others as well. So when we think about utilities, they are organized. They can be organized differently, and the three primary types of organization are publicly owned utilities, which have a strong constituent orientation. And then we can have cooperatively owned, which is a model we don't always hear quite as much about, but I think there was some mention of rural organizations. And of course, cooperative utilities serve their members. It's an interesting model that might be relevant today as well. And then we've got privately owned or investor-owned utilities, which are responsive to their shareholders in either publicly traded companies, publicly traded on the stock market, or in some cases, private equity firms, which are not publicly traded and sometimes involves foreign ownership as well. And we may have a little less transparency. And as you've already kind of mentioned, they have very large footprints. They tend to span big areas. Every state seems to have a couple of big ones. And some are multi-state. And then as you also mentioned, MISO, formerly Midwest, and then as it grew, its footprint became the mid-continent, right? Mid-continental transmission organization. So we have these large transmission operators. They don't actually own the systems. They operate the transmission systems. So many non-private utilities are also understood as and sort of frankly pushed to be enterprises, to be operate like a business. And I've always said that a well-run government organization has good business sensibilities. It understands its business function, and a really well-run private entity actually understands its public role, how important it is. And I tend to actually think more and more I use the term public infrastructure, regardless of who owns it. Because I think, all energy and water infrastructure is supposed to serve the public interest, and that's really vital to their role. I mean, that's the whole point of having these utility services. So in this enterprise model, they'll sort of segregate their funds in a municipality. And in some cases, even the municipality acts as a shareholder. And I'm sort of jumping ahead, but that's the case with Louisville Water. So it's very interesting that you're talking about Louisville, because Louisville Water, it has always stood out in the water sector as a case study of this somewhat unusual ownership model, where the city, it's some people call it rather corporatized. It's very segregated financially and in other ways. And the city is the sole shareholder of the utility. So very interesting model. Has had some very innovative work done, very strong leadership over the years. It's been very active in the broader water community. So Louisville Water is worth getting to know very well as you kind of explore these ideas. The different utilities have different distinctions, commonalities. Have a chart, sort of comparing those in a second. At the same time, though, even though there's differences, a lot of the core functions, and certainly when we get down to delivering services, setting rates, there's a lot more in common than there is apart. I'll touch on some of the reasons, though, that we see differences across utilities, especially in terms of the cost of service. And you do see differences in terminology, even from state to state, around some of these things. But because we're talking about monopolies, the concept of an unregulated monopoly is just not acceptable. So a lot of the municipal folks, if you say they're not regulated, they'll go, hold on, wait a minute. Yes, we are. We're just locally regulated. In other words, there's that accountability at the local level. A private monopoly is almost invariably regulated by the state, in some cases the federal government, if it's an interstate operation. So that regulatory authority grew as utilities and their footprints grew beyond local boundaries. So privately owned distribution companies are almost always state regulated. And you mentioned you're in a non-restructured state or in a state that maintains vertical integration. So your systems are regulated that way. Nonetheless, the fact that MISO is there means they're also participating in regional wholesale markets as well. And so we have kind of a little bit of a struggle, because we're seeing real advantages to developing some distributed resources, both on the supply side and the demand side. You've talked about that a little bit. But a lot of those new resource opportunities are actually bolstered by having a healthy grid. In other words, we still need the wires, we need the grids, because they help balance things out. If somebody's got wind and somebody's got solar at different times, those are complementary. The grid itself, in a way, stores power. It's going to allow for electrification. So we're going to see more load coming on with cars, possibly heating and so on. So the wires, about 10 years ago, we were all saying, oh, when will the grid be dead? And then now I think most of the science sort of supports a very important role for the grid going forward for those reasons. So in addition to sort of the public-private dichotomy, we also have hybrid systems. Again, I kind of already touched on this, where you could have municipal corporations like Louisville. There's others out there. I'll touch on the Pennachuck Water case, just because it's an interesting municipalization case. There's also an interesting model in Indianapolis where the assets are held in public trust. And I've always been intrigued. Now, in the real world, you hear from people the good, the bad, the ugly about these models, but at least on paper and in theory, this is a really interesting model. In other words, the assets are held in perpetuity for the citizens of Indianapolis, which I thought was, I've always thought that was very intriguing. You can also have partnership arrangements. You heard, I think you just heard a little bit about that, they could be purchase agreements, but they could be public-private partnerships for contractual arrangements. So there was somebody owns the asset, but somebody else manages it. under a contract, and then you can attach performance goals to that. So that can be kind of cool as well. The other thing I've written about recently is that our infrastructure needs are so important in this country, and affordability is so important as well, that we probably need to find some hybrid funding and financing solutions that combine public and private dollars. Effectively, that's what we're doing with the infrastructure funding these days from the federal government. I think we could just be much more intentional about that so that we can find ways to address environmental and environmental justice challenges, with those dollars. So I've already kind of mentioned, this was just brought up, this is sort of a traditional picture of, so that for those of you who are less familiar, there's this idea of vertical integration, which is a fancy way of saying the same utility would generate the power, transmit the power over higher voltage, and then distribute it out to us in our homes and businesses at a lower voltage. Now, again, renewable energy comes in, could potentially come in at different points in that picture now. With renewable energy, scale is still very relevant. In other words, generating lots of solar power, lots of wind power can be very cost effective if you've got the land and you've got, the ability to invest in that way. And again, that makes those wires important. At the same time, having some distributed energy and resources out even in the distribution system can help, if it's well managed, can help balance load. And especially if we can do things like pair up certain types of load with available solar energy, that's a real win-win. So it's a very dynamic, the way I think about it is it's a very dynamic system on both the supply side and the demand side these days. And that's what smart utilities are trying to keep in balance all the time. So when I think about, if I have questions about municipalization or public power, I turn to the American Public Power Association. If you don't know them, I would encourage you to get to know them at some point. APPA, I think their website's APPA.net. They collect lots of statistical data. They're a tremendous resource. I'll have some additional resources at the end from them. But this is their breakdown from a few years ago. We've seen this number of about 2,000 publicly owned public power systems in the country, and then upwards towards 900 cooperatively owned. And you see a very small number of privately owned. Well, the reality is, as you see on the right-hand side, they're the big players. They're the ones that have a lot of the customers. So they're large companies, in other words, that serve smaller number, but large companies that serve a lot of people. The other thing to take note of is not all publicly owned systems or utilities generate their power. Some of them will purchase their power, and so they're primarily distribution companies. So that's systems. That's what you were talking about a little bit earlier, as well as one of your options. So there's sort of their footprints across the country. These co-ops again are a really interesting model. And they don't serve quite as many people, but they really are vast across the country, and they serve the goal of rural electrification. And they're playing interesting roles now in water, broadband, and energy. So co-ops are worth considering too. And there's a list of the largest, for your reference. These are the largest public power systems in the country. Some of them quite big. And many of them really model systems, including on issues of customer engagement. I think to me, like Austin Energy stands out. I did a couple case studies a few years ago, and they really stood out in that respect. But these are all really dynamic systems in today's environment. And then here's a comparison table I put together. I have a longer version of this in a paper if you're interested in it, where I compared investor ownership, public ownership, and cooperative ownership, again, in terms of that ownership structure, who basically owns the assets. That's always a key distinction. What is their orientation? Is it toward profits or constituents, members? What are their governance structures? And this really matters. And it's going to matter to, I think, whatever solutions you ultimately pursue. You want to somehow insert yourself in the governance and regulation of the utility one way or the other, whether it's direct or through your advocacy. And so how the organization is structured matters in that regard. Again, if you've got profit-seeking entities, they're really investment-seeking entities. On the private side, they distribute their profits to shareholders, whereas a public organization can retain those earnings. And in some cases, they do make some transfers back to the municipality, but we want to be careful about that because that can become sort of a taxation issue, and you want to really limit those transfers. Whereas, again, in the cooperative model, you've got distribution to members. One thing that, again, is a big difference is whether or not they're regulated. Again, I already mentioned, like, all privately owned monopolies are going to be rate regulated by the state or the PSC. It's going to be really comprehensive. Some public utilities are regulated in some states, some of the time, same with the cooperatives. And so all utilities face some kind of regulatory context. And even if you're a municipal utility, even if you've got a degree of local control, you basically still operate within a heavily regulated sector. And so at times, federal regulation would apply. You may not be subject to state regulation, but you might, and actually, depending on how it's structured, and Kentucky law, for example, you could that could be triggered under some circumstances. Again, that would be up to the lawyers to evaluate. And then down at the local level, you've got city councils, commissions, boards or commissions, and managers that are in the governance of the utility as well. There's a PPA snapshot of the states that do have some authority. This is from the PSC perspective, again, for public power to one degree or another. So you can see it's not that rare. And in some states, there's actually fairly substantial regulation of the public power sector. Wisconsin, for example, if you're a water or a municipal water or energy utility, you're going to be subject to regulation the same as a private company. That means you're going to have your go through a rate review process, which isn't necessarily all that bad. I mean, it's there for accountability. So I dragged this out for actually a talk last week. So I thought, well, I can double up and use it here. It's from a book chapter I did a long time ago. And there was a book on ethics in the water sector, actually. But one of the things that you often, in this debate, people who advocate for the private sector and for privatization tend to stress the downside of public sector organizations. Oh, they're overly bureaucratic and they're rule bound and they're inefficient. They even sometimes, they're corrupt or whatever. And they emphasize that the private sector is just better at efficiency and innovation, entrepreneurship, and so on. There's actually a lot of work dispelling a lot of these myths and stereotypes. There's wonderful innovation coming out of the public sector. And there can be, and again, with both the public sector and the private sector, you can find good and bad. You can find certainly examples on both sides. So I think one of the things we need to do is just be careful not to fall into the, overgeneralization of either model. But I do want to highlight one thing, and this is where I've spent a lot of time on over the years developing my thoughts on this. So again, I teach utility rate making. How do we get to that, that bill that you pay every month for your energy and your water services? How do we get there? And so it's basically, it's accounting and rate making, because you first have to account for all of the costs that go into providing service. And so, these are not speculative. These are pretty factual that privately provided services are going to cost more. And for me, the top reasons are really, taxes. A lot of people forget about that. But if you're getting service from a private company, they're paying income taxes. Now, municipal corporations, municipal entities may pay an equivalent, that sometimes they call them PILT or pilot. You've heard of those, I'm sure, like where they pay a tax equivalent, but private companies pay taxes. Second, private companies have to pay a return on investment to their shareholders. In other words, that's the cost of capital, the cost to invest and finance assets over time. Those rates are going to be higher for the private sector than for the public sector. So the public sector will have access to a lower cost of capital. And then there's different depreciation and costing practices. I don't know if I have it on this chart, but overhead can be in there as well. And then just all kinds of differences in, I think I've got it down there lower, but differences in compensation, for example. Private companies, their CEOs can be, especially if they've got a large footprint, their CEOs can be very, very well compensated, and regulators may or may not allow all of that to flow through to ratepayers, but it can be a factor. And yeah, so these are all differences in pricing, costing, other factors that account for why your rates might be higher if you've got service from a private entity. So let's talk just a little bit about the motives. I just kind of cooked this up today, so take it with a grain of salt. I always tell people that my brain is always still a work in progress. I'm still thinking about this stuff, and but again, just hearing from folks like you and even listening to you this evening, why would anybody be interested in municipalization? And I think the 4 reasons that stand out to me are empowerment and local control, which I think communities, maybe this is even more apparent these days in our political environment and in the imperatives that you talked about, Sam, of climate action, that people want that. And so that relates to the second factor, which is environmental stewardship of our water and energy resources. And the two go together. That water uses energy, energy uses water. When we save water, we're saving energy, and vice versa. So it's really great to think about those in a cohesive way. Issues around justice, equity, affordability, again, with the COVID crisis and with with the pandemic, but with and then affordability concerns, people struggling to pay their bills, being threatened with disconnection. These are issues that cities want to be responsive to. And then, as I've just mentioned, lowering the cost of service. If there's a way that we can keep costs down so we can spend scarce resources on our priorities, that's part of this too. I would love to hear more, about what I'm missing, or, because I think there's different motivations in different areas. Now, I mentioned briefly, this is not an issue that's confined anywhere. It's really a global issue. So for many years, the World Bank and other international funding and support organizations were very interested in expanding the private role to, and I think with good motives, with the idea of getting energy, critical energy and water services out to people. So there's a lot of interest in privatization, and in some ways, though, getting control away from local governments and communities and putting it in the hands of the private sector, hopefully accompanied by regulation. But there are groups now tracking this. You think municipalization is hard to say. Remunicipalization, I find even harder to say. Like, that's really hard to get out. But there are groups tracking this now, and scholars looking at why are, sometimes at the country scale or within countries or major cities of the world, like Berlin and their water system, why are they looking to bring back some municipal control? And in the water sector, most of the country, and of course, even in the US, the private sector plays a minor role. The UK went to privatization, but most other countries favor government ownership of water utilities and a model that involves maybe contracts or concessions, they call them, to operate their systems with the private sector. Anyhow, you can see that this is across functions: water, energy, telecom, transport, education, waste management, so on. And I should have mentioned it earlier, but there's sort of a parallel set of interests going on around municipal broadband these days for some very similar reasons, because people want good service. They want it to reach everyone. They want, affordable access for everyone. So they're thinking about owning their broadband wires, which, by the way, could be done in conjunction with a municipal electric initiative. So kind of put that in the back of your mind, bring, right? I mean, I'm getting an amen from Sam there. So, all right. So again, I would encourage you to look at the APPA, American Public Power, as a resource. So I pulled these off really quickly. These are some of the case studies that are out there, really across the country, where where there's been interest in this, and it's ongoing. Ann Arbor, close to there's another school located down there from in Michigan. I'm at the Michigan State University, but down there by U of M, they have a strong initiative to look into public power. They've got a strong water utility that's municipally owned, so they're looking into that for very similar reasons as you. They're very interested in climate action and accelerating the pace. Now, so that's the good news. There's a lot of dialogue. The challenges they touched on a little bit, but changing utility ownership is really, really tough, and especially changing from private to public. It's frankly, the scales are tipped in favor of going from public to private in the water sector, and I've written about that a little bit. But it's very, very expensive. You've already, again, you've touched on this, the need for feasibility studies. Then you get into asset valuation, which is controversial, and consulting expenses. These are usually done, by the way, in the form of if it's a full takeover, if it's a hostile takeover in a way, it's done through eminent domain and condemnation, which sounds terrible, but basically that's the legal process. I'm not a lawyer, but some of you might be, but it's basically exercising eminent domain. So legal and procedural expenses can be quite high and quite arduous. And it seems like pretty much every case study that I'm familiar with is 10 years. I know of 2 cases in water that went on for 10 years. The Boulder case, you heard a little bit about before, 10 years. 10 years is a long time, especially in the context of our clean energy goals. I would agree. I think, I think you would agree, right? That's too long. We need action a lot faster than 10 years. So that's just something you have to be aware of. I do think the law tends to be protective, and the Constitution are very protective of private property rights. And you've got protections under the Constitution against taking of private property without just compensation and due process. So that's considered the takings clause of the Constitution. And this is usually what you just run up against very hard in the attempt to municipalize. And intense local politics. Municipal leadership, other local leaders and stakeholders, legislators will weigh in, regulators will weigh in, and they won't necessarily be favorable. And unfortunately, there can even be, political influence that we're not really pleased to see, or regulatory or legislative capture of special interests. And so you're kind of fighting against those forces. Now, I only just have started to think about this because I think your question is so important. What do you do in the absence of that? And by the way, I really like the way you framed this as looking at a wide range of options and ways to especially emphasize the city itself and its energy services. But so I thought of 3 A's: advocacy, aggregation, and alliances. Advocating before your state and local officials. Now, here's a kind of a good news story. The in Michigan again, Consumers Energy, I was really happy that you mentioned the IRP process. So Consumers Energy is one of our big utilities. We have Consumers and Detroit Edison, very large footprints. And Consumers Energy just settled its IRP case with the commission. There was strong advocacy before the commission, and they will phase out coal by 2025.
Whoa.
And so I would encourage you to take a look at that record, how they got there, maybe even talk to some of the advocates, because and it was a settlement agreement among all parties with the utility. This just came out within the last week. So take a look at that. You've talked about aggregation in a way. Aggregation is a way for you to exercise your purchasing power as a buyer of power who can also potentially generate some power. And by the way, you want to look at things like, working with Louisville. What if Louisville Water has property where you could be, and I wouldn't be surprised if they already had solar installations or even waste to energy, facilities. Working with other municipal entities and partners, to aggregate your demand and to seek efficiency. So I'm preaching to the choir here because I just heard a lot about that. And what your consultant is doing for you, which is fantastic. And then alliances, which you've also touched on with the government, with industry, with other utilities, with other neighboring communities, form those critical alliances. That's another way of exercising the power that you do have, because it is an uphill battle as far as municipalization, but that doesn't mean that you don't have power to exercise. And that's what by the way, the whole ESG movement, environmental, social, and governance in investing, that's all about. It's about people raising their voices about what they want and being, strong advocates for their communities and their environment. So I'll refer you to two editorials, one by a friend and colleague of mine who wrote a really depressing piece called "Even Studying Public Power Makes Little Sense," but then a retort by American Public Power saying it should be a community decision. So that just sort of contrasts this, the politics of this right there. So I'll touch on just like one or two case studies and I'll wrap it up. But this is a water case study of Pennachuck in New Hampshire that I've been fascinated about this for years. So I finally wrote it up, where they initiated an eminent domain. It was very hostile. It had to go through regulation and the courts and everything. Ultimately, though, they were able to purchase the company as a stock purchase, not a condemnation. They were actually able to convert it. And then the city of Nashua in New Hampshire became the sole shareholder, and it's operated as a regional system. Everybody believes that this is, and some of the managers stayed with the company through the whole thing. So they actually switched from private to public and very much believe in the model, that it has helped them achieve community goals and regional goals with their water system, even though it's still has a rather corporate structure to it, but it has, it's just a very interesting, very, very unusual case, but similar in some ways to Louisville Water. And then Boulder ended sadly after 10 years. But they have been able, I think, as we heard about earlier, they have been able to accomplish some of their goals in partnership ultimately with the utility. So you don't want to count that out. But you want to leverage your voice, right? In making sure that your utilities know, what you're hoping to achieve. And then, of course, Maine is a state to watch because the whole state is actually having a conversation. But here's some of the press that came out that said, seizure would take 10 years. This is, of course, an anti-takeover infographic saying it would cost, $13.5 billion. The governor has vetoed the initial takeover, but they've started a conversation. That conversation is ongoing. So it opens by raising these issues. You open the door to having a conversation and hopefully having some positive influence. So I will stop there. I hope that was somewhat helpful, and I'd be glad to, try to answer any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Beecher. That was interesting. And it made me realize that if we do municipalize, we have some responsibilities which we don't have now as far as actually running the utility. And it made me think also that if all you're concerned about is money and pricing, then it's probably better to let the private sector take care of it. But if you have other considerations like the environment and the climate and so forth, then you run into situations which corporations may not be the best way to handle it. So that's sort of what I got out of your talk. But we have a few minutes for questions, and I think the best way to do that would be for people to turn your screens on if you have a question and just raise your hand, and I'll recognize you and just let me know who you want to ask the question to, and we'll just go ahead with it. So I'll recognize anyone who raises their hand. Do we have some takers? Yes, Margaret.
Well, this is a request actually to Janice. The article that was more hopeful, I guess, I think it was public should have input about make decisions. Joy Ditto, I think, was the, could you put in the chat how to read that article, how to find that article?
Definitely. Yeah.
Thank
And I think I've got it. Yeah, I've got it embedded. So I'll be glad to share all these resources. Yep.
Thank you.
All right. Yes. Jesse.
Hi. Thank you. I had a question. I was surprised in this conversation to not hear any mention of microgrid, kind of characterized as somewhere between those two extremes of like a credit, there's two extremes under municipalization of like a credit trading scheme versus an entirely new distribution network. And I was just wondering if that had been looked at specifically anywhere. I mean, admittedly, microgrid could not serve the entire city off the bat, which is like what it seems like an important goal here is, but it could certainly serve like the most power hungry elements, like the water company, for example. And it's a really scalable solution. It might be, if this is a really challenging goal to replace all the power for the whole city in one step, I was wondering if this had been considered as an alternative.
So I can answer that for Louisville. We are very interested in microgrids and community solar, but as it stands now, we have to purchase energy through LG&E. So we cannot build solar for one neighborhood like that, because Cincinnati has done this to great success. They have built out community solar one neighborhood at a time. We are unable to do that without going through LG&E. And so that's why we've taken kind of this view of municipalization. We can't really do anything short of that. Those are our options here. That being said, if we were to municipalize, local grids is probably what we would do to serve either metro government operations, or if we were to build out for the whole community, we probably wouldn't purchase LG&E's assets. We would build out these grids and community solar. The more generation you have, the more reliable it is. And that's a huge issue with the solar, with any renewable energy, is how do you make that reliable and available 24/7? And so doing that distributed throughout the territory makes it much more reliable. If one neighborhood goes down, the whole city doesn't go down. But that would have to be part of municipalization. And Dr. Beecher, do you have anything to add?
No, but I think it's a great question. A lot of people think that interconnected microgrids are the future. They could be owned and operated by anybody, or maybe form some kind of a partnership. But unfortunately, when we think about utilities, so much of the cost is actually in distribution. So that's where we actually get diseconomies of scale, because it's a wire and you don't want the duplication. As you said, if you're at the end of life with those assets, then you may have a chance to build it, but you want to be very careful there. It's hugely expensive. If you look at the assets of a utility, they're going to be heavily weighted towards the distribution assets. But yeah, I absolutely agree that I think the microgrid concept is a very, very good one for municipal governments, for college campuses and within cities. Yeah, great question.
Okay.
Just for one more comment on that, if the city got 2 proposals after their RFP, microgrids are going to get a ton of attention from academic institutions, from industry resources. I think it's a good buzzword to put out there, if nothing else.
Okay, very good. We might have time for one quick one. Anybody else have a question? Okay, let's.
I'm waving my hand, Sam.
There you are. Okay, make it quick, Wallace, but go ahead.
Okay, I want to say, Allison, I'm very impressed by what I think is a knowledgeable and intelligent approach from what you told us tonight. I was really pleased with your briefing and how nicely it seems like you're proceeding very thoughtfully. Question to Dr. Beecher. I know that when Boulder, Colorado started pursuing municipalization, that Xcel, the big utility, did everything they could to suppress, squelch, and generally screw Boulder. And I'm curious if you can tell us about some of the specific legal tactics they used to try to frustrate the interest in municipalization there.
Yeah, great question. And I haven't studied it closely recently, but it's usually going to boil down, just as sort of a generic answer, but it's going to boil down to valuation and compensation issues. They will come up with a huge, huge number. And so usually there's a real discrepancy between what a city is willing and able to spend and what they're willing to accept, and they'll go to the courts with that. And they'll also make a lot of arguments about expertise to, run the system. Now, this goes back to Sam's comment. You can actually enter into a contractual relationship to run it. So in other words, you can have sort of a hybrid model where you even still maintain some of the team that knows the system now. But yeah, they will argue that they have more expertise, that they have more access to capital markets, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But it will usually come down to valuation issues very heavily. And those are and they are constitutional questions.
As sort of a follow-up, I understand that in Michigan, Ann Arbor is actively trying to pursue municipalization. And that you're supposed to be an authority on that, by the way. How far along are they?
I don't know if I'm probably more of an authority on privatization, the other way. So I tried to get an update. I think there's still, the community is very actively engaged. And I think it'll be an interesting, see how this plays out with DTE, because that company may want to try to find a way to find some middle ground where they can partner to achieve, help the community achieve its clean energy goals.
Okay, thank you, Wallace, and thank you, Dr. Beecher. Margaret, you want to wrap it up and get John back on the
Yes.
guitar there?
All
Okay.
right. And I want to say thank you to you, Sam, and to Allison and Janice as well. I want to remind people of some of the actions you can take very quickly. Remember, sign up to speak at the Metro Council. Paul, I hope you'll post again Sam's information, that contact, so people can get more information. You can register, and now we hear there's going to be an extended deadline for Solar Over Louisville. You can submit comments and invite your friends to submit comments. Overwhelm the PSC with comments. Look for more information with that link. And you can join us in September for our next Real Good News event, when we'll examine how other cities are successfully transitioning to clean, renewable energy. We'll hear now again from John Gage, and also you might want to check out his latest album, Circles of Our Lives. It features 9 original songs. So John?
I think I'm here. Oh,
You are. Oh,
thank you, Margaret. Thanks to all of you for an inspirational evening. That I realize it's a Herculean task for all of us, and I appreciate your efforts. So I want to sing this song just to kind of put a little more wind in the sails and in this say, I think that you all have already done and are doing what I'm talking about in this little song. Melody is written by Travis Edmondson, and I wrote the words. Find your voice, speak your mind, bring clean energy to humankind. Be the eyes for a world gone blind. Find your voice, speak your mind. You wake up in the morning, read the news. It's very clear to see the whole world's confused. Cynical voices say you're too weak, too small. If you try to fly, you're bound to fall. A courageous heart, so hard to find, calls to you. Speak your mind. Stand up tall. Stand and be strong. Lift your voice. Sing your song. The pathway to hope lies within. Your heart holds the love for this wounded world to mend. In the stillness of a sunset, soulful voices blend. A new day is dawning, new world begins. A courageous heart, so hard to find, calls to you. Speak your mind. Stand up tall. Stand and be strong. Lift your voice. Sing your song. Find your voice. Speak your mind. Bring hope and justice to humankind. Be the eyes for a world gone blind. Find your voice. Speak your mind.
Thank you, John, and thanks to each one of you for attending this evening. We're so glad you did. If you want to view this on, you'll find a recording of it on Kipple, Kentucky Interfaith Power and Lights, their YouTube page, and we hope to see you all in September. Bye-bye.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.